design digital content accessibility. Here's a few housekeeping items before we get started. Please hold your questions until the end. Danielle will take questions at the end of the presentation. And we do have time constraints, so if you don't get to everybody's question, you can always chat with Danny after the conference or reach out to her via email. The session is being recorded and it will be made available after the conference is over with. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce today's speaker, Daniela Martinez. She is a leading advocate for digital inclusion and accessibility. Danny serves as the program manager for Forever Bluff's digital engagement for the Alumni Association at the University of Colorado Boulder. Managing the Forever Buffs Network online community and emerging digital programming. Danny is passionate about building supportive communities and meaningful relationships through alumni engagement. She is a proud Forever Bluff and CNCI alumna and graduate with a BA in communication and minors in journalism and sports media. She began her postgraduate journey with the MLB, coordinating volunteers for the All-Star Game in Denver. She's also worked for the Colorado Rockies on their promotions and events operations crew and the Denver Broncos Community Impact Giveaway team. Let's welcome Danny.
Hey everyone, so excited to be here with you all. I'm gonna attempt to see if these subtitles work. Testing, testing. If not, here we go. Amazing. So thank you so much, Melissa, for the warm intro. I'm Danny Martinez, and I'm going to be chatting a little bit about digital accessibility, both in your internal and external communications. An agenda of everything we're going to go over. I'm going to do a brief overview of digital accessibility and a little bit about what it entails. Also a case study about what we offer at CAMMP in terms of digital accessibility, and an intro to content, and we're going to go over some accessibility best practices and go into depth into some examples, including link text, color contrast, visual style, and alternative text. And these are just some introductions, but I hope this session will inspire you to dig a little bit deeper into digital accessibility, and then we'll wrap up with the Q&A session. So a very brief history into digital accessibility. It was expressed by the disability rights advocates and enshrined in the national and international legislation under the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as ADA. But as we all know, the passage of laws alone don't make content and software accessible. Digital accessibility is something that software vendors and digital content providers have in mind, but it's very hard to enforce consistently, especially across all of our institutions and different platforms. And as we know, not every single digital service that we offer is unfortunately not fully accessible to individuals with disabilities. In this way, we have to take a proactive role in managing our software and the content that we create, not only externally, but even internally as well, so that individuals with disabilities are able to participate fully in your campus's digital environment. So what is digital accessibility? At the University of Colorado Boulder, we've defined it as this purpose. All people should have the opportunity to access the same information and services in the digital environment without facing undue barriers or burdens. And I'm going to go a little bit into the digital accessibility at CAMMP Boulder and the different offices that this encompasses. So we have our disability services, which mostly supports our students, also including in continuing education, so those completing college online, with accommodations for things like courses, housing, and dining. A lot of this might encompass what you might originally think of as accessibility, things like ramps, having appropriate testing time, having recordings, captions, and videos, and things like that. And the ADA coordinator's office are the folks who, the full-time employees that provide the accommodations for public access. And the digital accessibility office are our campus subject matter experts, and they're the ones who work with digital accessibility for staff, faculty, and also our students. What they do is provide strategic planning assistance for digital accessibility, meaning that they help folks who come in and have questions, make sure that things are up to standard, help be proactive and plan ahead if they're looking to implement any digital content and make sure that they're up to standard. And again, folks have to take a proactive individual to come to this office and ask for their resources and their support. And this is how I originally got connected with this office, is I looked a little bit about what they did, enrolled myself in one of the trainings, and have really been inspired to do a little bit more. They also practice accessibility and usability testing, meaning that you can come with, say, a PowerPoint presentation, a new vendor, and they'll run it through different situations where maybe a screen reader would need to be used, or they'll actually have staff members who have disabilities test things out to make sure that they're up to standards and provide recommendations. So again, a great way to be proactive. And they also provide captioning and training to all CU staff, faculty, and students. And their goal here is to make everyone's content operable. Operable is when you have the proper structure and meaning that is provided to allow assistive technology to interact with your various documents or contents in predictable ways. So some things like making your content operable include including headings to make sure that screen readers are able to decipher between different chapters or areas of content, or even creating a hyperlink with link text that also describes the link destination, a little bit about something that will go into my later slides. There are a ton of different topics that digital accessibility covers, and in our present today, I'll go over a little bit of them. But they also include document accessibility, things like putting content accessibility into practice through use of headers and hyperlinks, presentation accessibility. So for example, by turning my captions on this presentation today, I helped a little bit with that. PDF accessibility, making sure that the content that you send is accessible to everyone. But it can also be very platform specific. So usually Microsoft Office products, Google, etc., they have their own ways of making sure that your content is accessible, and it's just about knowing where to go into these different products to make sure that everything is turned on and you're using it to the best of your capacity to make sure that as many people as possible are able to understand your content. Now we're going to take a little bit of this into practice and go over some examples, and we're going to start off with link text. Link text uses words instead of putting a full URL to make it easier for users to determine where you're going to take them. So anywhere from newsletters to sending internal emails to colleagues, we see links being used and sent. So I'm going to open it up to an audience question. I'd love to know, which example here is clearer? The first one that says color.edu/coloronning, student spotlight, etc., or read Lauren Elbert's Alumni Magazine feature story. Two. Yes. So here, including a good link text helps people with screen readers. So if someone is utilizing a screen reader to view a document, they're going to see all the links listed in one place. So if you had something like click here, you would have click here listed maybe 5 or 6 different times depending on how many links you're using in that certain document. Or if you have the full URL, that is what is going to be read out loud to them. So if you can imagine, it would say https://www and so on. So by describing the place that you're taking your user to, not only does it make your content more accessible, it's also easier for them to navigate through a screen reader. And if you have links with the same link text that have different destinations, you also wouldn't be able to decipher where they're taking you. So as a whole, link text should be unique, concise whenever possible, and also descriptive of the place that you're taking them. So generic and uninformative text like here, click here, read more, which I know I used to use quite often, not only in my content, but also with emails to my colleagues. Things like that should be avoided. Again, thinking about if everything were to be listed all in one place, would someone be able to tell where that link is taking them? So for example, a bad example would say, for accessible technology resources, click here. And a good example would say, consult our accessible technology resources, so you know that link is taking you right there. If a link destination is a document instead of a web page, it's also good practice to have a little hint about where it's taking you to. So for example, if something is going to download a PDF or a Word document in your computer, it's also good practice to put it in parentheses at the very end. So in summary, when utilizing link text, it's best to describe the destination concisely, identify the type if that's something that's important, And avoid using duplicate names, and whenever possible, don't write out full URLs unless it's something that's meant to be memorized. Okay, I have an example. Pretend this is gonna be in my upcoming email newsletter. One being to enter our football ticket giveaway, click here, and to donate $1 billion to CU, click here. If someone is wanting to do one action versus the other, they're gonna be totally different. So I'd love to ask someone in the audience, which one would you wanna click? Football team. There we go. Got it right. So, if I were to word this a little bit differently, you could say that even though they both say the same wording, they have wildly different actions and maybe consequences. Next, I'm gonna go into color contrast. Color contrast is the difference in brightness between the background and the foreground of your colors. So for example, a high level of contrast would be black text on a white background, and low would be maybe a light gray color on a white background. And people often have difficulty perceiving content when there isn't sufficient contrast. I think this came up with a presentation earlier where someone was saying that they had a red wall and maybe silver lettering where it was hard to take pictures of content, said there's not enough contrast, I can't see the difference between it. And high color contrast is critical for individuals, everybody actually, and especially who are colorblind or have low vision, and benefits many others. So here's an example of our Forever Buffs Network mentorship logo. And we have a black foreground, and we have white and gold picture in it. And color contrast, if your content is important enough to be included anywhere from a document or a website, then it's important to ensure that it's perceivable to all sighted readers. So if it's important enough to put it somewhere to read, make sure that folks can actually read it. A question that a lot of folks ask is, how do I actually measure color contrast? It's super important to actually download a color contrast checker tool. Your eyesight alone often isn't enough to decipher whether something has high enough contrast and adheres to accessibility standards. So on this PowerPoint, I shared the color contrast analyzer, which is a software we were able to use an eyedropper tool to select between two different colors and say, is there enough contrast for me to be able to use this? Again, through an eyedrop tool or also a hex code. This is a little bit about what it looks like. So for example, I see this eBoulder logo that is on many CU Boulder websites. And I actually found out that this color combo is inaccessible. There's not enough contrast between white and gold. So even though those are both of our school colors, and maybe a lot of people think that they're school colors, it's okay to put them together, it's actually now on our branding website to not use this color combo. Next, I'm gonna go into visual style. The color principle of visual style is that color, text, formatting should not be used as the sole way of communicating meaning. Visual style makes up any formatting that is indicating something to your readers, anything from using italics to indicate sarcasm, bolding to make something really visible, underlining to draw attention or hyperlinks, punctuation. Also, you can use spatial positioning or text spacing to draw more white space or attention to something, and also colors. So what I mean is that there should be more than one way to indicate meaning instead of just visual style alone. So this is something that came into practice on our nature hike. If someone were to provide this guide on a nature hike saying, can I touch that plant? One example says aloe vera green, poison ivy red, poison oak red, violets green. And by using this example, I'm able to tell, okay, green means that it's good, red means that I should avoid. But if someone were to be colorblind, or maybe say a printer ran out of ink, all of a sudden that text is not able to be used. So by making this content accessible, you would then put in parentheses what you actually mean, meaning yes or no, and that's communicated through words instead of just color alone. And this is present in a ton of different ways, and style is actually a very helpful way to make content accessible. For example, this is an example that I found of a railway system that indicated different lines and where they were. noticing that not only do they have arrows, text, but they have icons as well, so not just color alone. And it's never should be used as the only way to convey meaning, but rather something that can be helpful. So to summarize, if something is vital in your communications, make sure that it's clear to all potential viewers. Always supplement color-coded information with explanations somewhere in the text that you're providing. So using words like important or using fonts to indicate. You should reserve underlining only for links and when possible, avoiding cluttered or scattered content. When a screen reader is using software to read content, for example, if you don't have any paragraph breaks or indentations, it'll just not take breaks and read everything from beginning to end. So it helps the user decipher content and navigate content a little bit faster as well. And also, lastly, use white space around sections or objects to help visual grouping. Next, I'm going to talk about alternative text. And alternative text or alt text is when images are a visual medium that is inaccessible to individuals who are blind. And one way to make images more accessible is to add a text-based description of what the image is. So maybe some of us have stumbled upon this if you're reading a newsletter, for example, and there's not enough Wi-Fi, and you'll see a description of the image instead of the image being downloaded. So most content creation platforms allow content creators to add alternative text to images. And alt text is not visible to folks when viewing a document normally, but it can be visible to those using screen assisting technology. So for example, in my presentation, if someone were to download this, I added descriptions of all my images so that it would be accessible to multiple different folks. And I'd love to know if someone could help me out. What is an example of maybe what an image description or alt text for what this image could be? And I do have prizes. If someone's brave enough. There you go.
I would say aerial photograph of CU Boulder campus, including the stadium and any other buildings. I'd probably say clear summer day, mountains in the background, trees and whatever.
Thank you very much. We'll see just how spot on you are. But thanks for starting us off. I really appreciate it. Let me go back one step. So ideally, just like you said, an image description was if you were closing your eyes, what would you want to know? What is important about this image? So for example, knowing that this is for a CU Boulder audience, most likely I could even say aerial image of the Flatirons, and that audience would know what I'm talking about. If it's for a more general audience, I would say an aerial view of the University of Colorado Boulder featuring the mountains and some views of campus. Usually keeping it concise to when possible, 1 to 2 sentences, because again, that screen reader is going to read them all out loud in one place. So while descriptions are helpful, they are also meant to be concise and objective whenever possible. This also helps encompass decorative images. So decorative images are anywhere where an image doesn't provide any additional information or context. So if I were to add this little sunshine or heart to my presentation, it doesn't really tell me anything about what my presentation is about. I just thought they looked cute. And this is the only instance where you don't have to provide image descriptions. So imagine if the images were stripped from the document. A good question to ask yourself is, would this matter if the images weren't here? If the answer is no, it's not really making a difference, then it's a decorative image and doesn't need alt text. And if yes, this image is important to the message that I'm trying to convey, it should have alternative text included. Some frequently asked questions related to alternative text that I hear often is, will everyone be able to see alt text? And no, alt text is a behind-the-scenes description of an image, and it's not typically visible to users who are viewing a document or a web page, but it's available to people who are using a screen reader to perceive the page, or like I said in an earlier example, if there's not enough Wi-Fi to download maybe a newsletter or image, that's what's gonna pop up. Another question is, what if my alt text has to be longer than 1 or 2 sentences? Ideally, alt text should always be a concise description of around maybe 150 characters, so that's about 1 or 2 sentences. If a longer description is absolutely needed, then that information is probably likely to be included in your text somewhere else, so not entirely conveyed in an image by itself. So maybe in the main body of the document if it's super important to include. And I see a lot of longer descriptions often needed for things like having tables, graphs, or flowcharts. And if you provide a long description elsewhere, you should still provide the alternative text. So you can say, the diagram of a creep cycle. There's a longer description to follow, so folks know to keep reading on. I also compiled some good tips on how to write good alternative text. So unfortunately, it is more of an art than a science. So you're asking yourself, why is the image important to the context of the document or the content that I'm creating? And guide your decisions on which details are important to include to inform what's in the description. It's also best to put the most important information at the beginning of the image. So avoid using phrases like, this is an image of, or this is a photo of, because that's usually implied. So for example, if I were to describe the images included here, instead of saying, this is an image of the most beautiful mountain range in the US, which might be true to me, but it's not really scientifically correct. So I would say this is an aerial image of the Flatiron Mountain Range in CU Boulder. Or instead of saying, here is an image of the best mascot in college sports, which was true, I think, in 2013, I would say, here is Ralphie, led by the Ralphie Handlers on CU Boulder's football stadium, Folsom Field. So avoid providing subjective interpretation. The goal here is to just describe what is being visually presented whenever possible in a neutral tone. It's also important to consider identity in inclusion in alt text. And CU Boulder created some guidance in that what is meant to be a starting point to create a deeper understanding of the implications that alt text can have when people in the subject of the image and how you're describing them. So I've linked that here. I encourage you all to look at how identity and inclusion are to be considered when describing folks and situations in alt text guidelines. So brief summary of digital accessibility. Again, this is just skimming the surface of what to me is a super important topic, so I hope this sparks your imagination to dig a little bit further, maybe to look at your institutions and what support is available, or maybe thinking about how you can start on your own journey, whether it's emailing a colleague, writing a newsletter. You're all communicators in everything you do, and this is something that you can start practicing right away. And it's a mindset that you have to be proactive about. I've printed out some accessible content checklists, one that I include right next to my desk, something that I can glance over when sending something like a newsletter or creating a presentation. Because it is a skill set that you have to build, a very helpful way that I started out was just focusing on one thing. So thinking about, okay, over the next 2 weeks, link text, I'm gonna be a pro, that's all I'm gonna be thinking about, and I'm really gonna work hard at it before moving on to other subjects and maybe learning a little bit more. It's also really fun to invite others along with you. So it's a fun way to allow new colleagues to learn something new and something that everyone can genuinely start to practice. So in my digital accessibility journey, I find myself collaborating a ton with my social media manager, Hannah, on our Advancement Marcom team, and this is something we did together. We went over coffee, we looked at YouTube videos together, and even dug a little bit deeper to find out, is there social media specific digital accessibility practices, for example. So once you start, you can really get into some deep rabbit holes here. And here it's super important to remember that digital accessibility and looking at it as an approach is rather a mindset of learning instead of perfection. There's always new guidelines that are coming out, but I think the goal here is just to rather start somewhere instead of being overwhelmed about maybe how many things on your website are inaccessible. It's just taking it one step at a time, and that action is way better than not doing anything at all. So like I said, practice one topic at a time, and importantly, your stories and the messages that you all create and share with your audiences are so important. important to make sure that as many people as possible are able to read them and understand them. Thank you all so much, and I think we may have some time for questions. I see one in the back. Should I bring the microphone?
Testing. I actually have two questions. The first question is, if an image has text included, do you have to, or is it best practice to include the text and a description of the image in your alt text, or is just the text enough?
That's a great question. So when something like an infographic, for example, it's always best practice to put in quotation exactly all the messaging that's in the image. So for example, if someone wasn't able to see the image, how are you making sure that they still understand all the content that is going on? So something that I see a lot of this important is if I'm posting an event, for example, and I have a poster to go along with it. So if the poster has important information like where the event is or the date time, I make sure that if there's a description paired alongside of it, I have all the information included somewhere, so that someone who is looking at the image gets all the correct information. So you don't have to say graphic containing this, just making sure to state out all the words that it says.
And my other question is it best practice to use neutral descriptions of people in a text? So like, for instance, instead of saying three women, should you say 3 people?
And this is where alt text, again, starts to be more of an art than a science. And I would really encourage you to look at the link I provided about CU Boulder's guidelines on accessibility, but it really unfortunately depends on the context. What information is most important for your reader to know? For example, are they maybe young students and having age, and that description is really important. So thinking about the audience instead of just saying, if someone just knows that it's 3 people, does that change the meaning of what I'm trying to say? But that could be a separate presentation entirely, but that is a great question. Does anyone have anything else? And let me get you a sure.
So I was wondering about the closed captioning. Do you find that most software programs have it included? So I'm thinking like Zoom, PowerPoint, all that stuff, it just has it like built in, or?
Yeah, so you can always Google whatever platform you're using and accessibility and see if it's a hidden feature. Zoom, for example, PowerPoint is just about knowing what buttons to turn on. But this is where the Digital Accessibility Office comes in, and if content doesn't already have captioning, that's when they would help support me in creating it. But it's super helpful, I think, to everyone. We've started implementing it in our PowerPoint presentations, for example, in our hybrid meetings, where folks are in person and virtually. And it's really so helpful to everyone to have captions. If maybe I missed something that was said earlier, I can see in the little delay. And it really is super helpful, but it's often just Googling where those features are. And if it doesn't have captioning, maybe it's worth looking at another software, maybe.
I touched on social media, and that's a whole different bear, but do you use alt text on your social media posts, all of them?
We sure do. So things like Instagram, LinkedIn, is just about knowing where to find things like that. On our Forever Boss Network, our online community, alt text is always present in images as well. So it's just about knowing where to find those features, but a lot of vendors do have them. Yes. That was a great question. But like you said, social media is just about finding where things are.
So how do you handle link descriptions for buttons? That's something we've struggled with, where you have very limited space and you do something like purchase tickets. Do you find it better to have a bigger button that says purchase tickets to, or do you stick with a smaller button?
Yeah, I think if always you're having the verb or the action, if it's describing something where they're gonna be led to, for example, purchase tickets is exactly suffice. And as long as you don't have purchase tickets anywhere else in that document, if you wanna be specific to say purchase tickets to football game or purchase tickets to art festival, just as long as it's not the same description in more than one place, you should be fine, yeah. But I think more often than not, keeping it concise and having more information in that paragraph above is helpful, but great question. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you all so much for having me. It was great chatting with you all, and I'm always available to help answer any additional questions. And like I said, we printed out some accessible content checklists that you can have right next to your desk and be checking some things off as you create content and provide this lens in all the work that you do. So thank you all so, so much.
Before we go, let's say thank you again to Danny. She's given us a lot to think about today when it comes to making digital content more accessible, and your practical guidance and your printouts are incredibly valuable as we move forward. So thank you so much. All right, up next, we're going to be concluding the sponsor